The wind cut across the valley, dragging thin shards of snow sharp as blades against the skin. On the Texas plateau, the night refused to sleep. It slithered over every hill, howling through every crack in the rocks as if it meant to tear apart the silence of the land. Inside a lonely wooden cabin, the fire in the hearth flickered, its glow trembling across the dry gray planks. Rowan jolted awake, not because of the wind, nor the brittle groan of the roof straining against the snowstorm. What tore him from sleep was something else, a strange instinctive alertness known only to men who had lived too long in this land. That kind of wakefulness that made his fingers twitch toward the gun by his bed before his eyes had even opened. When his lashes lifted, the firelight flickered in his pupils. And then Rowan saw the thing that made his heart clench. A figure, not an illusion, not a dream. In the wavering glow, a young woman crouched close to the flames. Her face was wet, her hair tangled into dark, matted strands. Her lips quivered, purple with cold, her bare hands raw and swollen. The fire seemed too weak to warm her, yet clung stubbornly to her features, as though trying to keep a fading life alive. Rowan tightened his grip on the gun. His heart hammered fast, but his breath came slow, restrained. Who was this woman, and how had she stepped into a cabin he had locked tight? Just as he was about to speak, she lifted her face. Her dark eyes, heavy with firelight, glimmered like winter water. Her voice was hoarse, trembling yet deliberate. "I can be useful. Please, just let me stay quiet here. Don't throw me out." The words cracked like blades in the silence of the room. Simple, brief, but brimming with naked desperation. That sentence tied every question in Rowan's mind into a knot. Who was she? Why this cabin? And what did she mean to trade for a fragment of warmth? The wind outside screamed, threatening to swallow everything. Yet inside that wooden shell, there were only two breaths. One taut with suspicion, the other pleading for life. Rowan did not lower the gun. His eyes sharpened, catching every detail, honed by years of surviving danger. Her skin was pale, her eyes bruised with sleeplessness, her wrists swollen and marked with bruises. Her shoes were caked with snow and mud, the leather torn at the toes. Her body shook uncontrollably, yet in her voice burned a streak of resolve, as if she were more than a pitiful wanderer begging for shelter. The fire flared suddenly, casting her face in sharp relief. Rowan saw it clearly. She was no local. Her features were unfamiliar, and her rushed, uneven accent carried the echo of someplace far away. "I'll do anything," her voice cracked, but her gaze never left his. "Just don't cast me back into death out there." The cabin sank into a dreadful stillness. Only the snap of wood in the fire and the storm's fist against the walls remained. Rowan felt the air press tighter, as though an invisible hand were closing around his throat. He had not asked. She had not explained. But in that instant, one truth was undeniable. This woman carried a secret so weighty it had driven her to risk everything, to slip into a stranger's home and beg to cling to life. Rowan gave no answer. He stood, letting the silence stretch, as if to test the patience of them both. Each passing second painted their shadows across the timbered wall, the taut frame of a man with a gun, and the broken shape of a woman clinging to the last shred of warmth. In that moment, only one question hung heavy between them, unspoken yet sharp as a blade. Who was she, truly? The encounter and the desperate offer. Jonas kept the gun lowered but not put away. His eyes tracked every movement of the strange woman. The small cabin grew too quiet, broken only by the crack of wood burning in the hearth. "Sit." Jonas's voice was rough, clipped. Alina hesitated, then slowly lowered herself onto the animal hide near the fire. The motion was awkward, her joints stiff. She tilted slightly, limping as though one leg carried an old injury. Jonas noticed, his eyes narrowing, but he said nothing. He poured water from a wooden jug. The sound of it was sharp in the silence, each drop falling heavy between them. Jonas held the cup out. Alina took it with both hands. Skin cracked, fingers raw and reddened, the nails ragged. She drank. The water slipped past dry, bleeding lips. A rasping sound rose from her throat, the swallow of someone who had gone too long without it. When the cup was empty, she let out a long, weary breath. "You got a name?" Jonas asked. The words came slowly, without a trace of warmth. "Alina." Her voice wavered, but it was firm. He gave a small nod. "Jonas." That was it. 2 names. No more. No past, no trust. A cold introduction, stripped bare, as though every word had to be weighed before spoken. Alina met his gaze. Her eyes were dark, ringed, sunk with exhaustion, yet still strangely bright. She paused a moment, then spoke, her words sharp, clean, unadorned. "I can cook, mend clothes, cut wood. I can warm your bed if you want. I can bear children." The words struck the cabin like hammer blows. No shame, no hesitation, just raw, unpolished truth. A survival bargain spoken by someone with nothing left. Jonas stayed still. He did not blink. The gun in his hand dropped lower, but his eyes stayed hard. He saw her cracked lips, her scraped arms, the faint cuts still seeping red. She had endured too much to say this as seduction. It was nothing more than the last negotiation for life. The room fell silent again. The fire crackled, casting their shadows high across the log walls. Jonas knew she wasn't lying. A person with nothing left to lose had no reason to waste breath on lies. He rose, set the gun aside. A faint sound escaped Alina. Not fear, but the weakness of a body pushed too far. Jonas pulled out an old blanket and laid it near the fire. "You're not going back out there, but you're not getting in my bed either." His voice was steady, final, leaving no space for argument. Alina looked at him. Her eyes glistened faintly, not with tears but with the damp haze of exhaustion. She nodded once. No protest, no pleading. His words, cold as they were still the only mercy left to her. She drew the blanket around herself, clutching it tight, still trembling. Her breathing slowed, but her shoulders stayed tense. Her whole body seemed like a bowstring stretched too far, given a moment's slack, but never truly at rest. Jonas returned to the table, sat down. He pulled a knife and began carving wood, the repeated scrape of blade on grain filling the silence. He didn't ask where she came from, didn't ask why she was here. She offered nothing more. Everything hung unspoken, unanswered, as though they both agreed the only thing that mattered tonight was survival. The firelight showed every cut on Alina's hands, the bruises circling her wrists, the weight of her breath. Jonas knew. Whatever she had endured, it was no small thing. And he also knew, keeping her here meant bringing mystery and risk into a life already balanced on danger. But Jonas didn't send her away. He couldn't. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks, the night thick and sharp with cold. Inside, 2 strangers sat across from one another, bound by nothing but silence and the thinnest of agreements. She would live, but under his rules. Jonas poured another cup of water, set it near her. "Sleep. We'll sort it in the morning." Alina took the cup, her fingers trembling, but a flicker of safety lit her eyes. She drank slowly, then set it down. Her breathing eased. The small wooden cabin was no longer the shelter of one man. From this night on, it would hold a secret, a life preserved, and the fragile beginning of something new, carved out against the brutal Texas cold. Building the habit of vigilance and the revelation of the past. The following days passed not with chaos, but with the quiet rhythm of survival. Each morning began the same. Jonas stirred the dying coals, tossed in another log, and ladled the simmering oats into 2 bowls. Alina ate slowly, sometimes wincing as though her cracked lips still burned from thirst. When they finished, she quietly cleaned both bowls, rinsed them, and set them back on the shelf. It was not spoken, but a new order was being built inside the cabin. An order that carried both caution and the heavy silence of 2 people learning how to exist in each other's presence. Jonas kept his words short. He watched, observed, measured her every move. Alina, on the other hand, never tried to explain herself unless asked. Yet one evening, while the firelight flickered across the wooden walls, she broke that silence with a voice both steady and raw. "A man named Apprentice," she began, her eyes fixed on the flames. "White man. He took me, traded me off when he was tired of hiding me." Her words carried no embellishment, only the blunt edges of truth. Jonas didn't interrupt. He let the story weigh down the space, his hand resting loosely on his cup. Finally, she added, "I didn't run. I noticed," Jonas replied simply. No thanks, no pity, just acknowledgement. The silence after was heavy but not hostile. It was the silence of two people recognizing each other's scars without prying deeper. One night, as he set down a folded blanket near the fire, Jonas made his stance clear. "This isn't charity," he said. His voice was firm, not unkind. "You don't owe me anything else. That's not the kind of thing you owe anyone." The statement drew a subtle line. Whatever Alina had offered in desperation before was no longer on the table. The foundation of their coexistence would not be built on her body, but on fairness and work. Alina's answer wasn't spoken, but shown. The next morning, while Jonas was mending the harness, she quietly picked up his worn shirt and began stitching the torn seams. Her hands were steady despite the faint bruises still visible on her arms, proof of a violence she did not need to describe. Jonas noticed but said nothing. He let her act speak for itself. Later, when she asked lightly, "You trust me in here?" Jonas's eyes lifted from the leather strap he was tying. "No," he said after a pause. Then, with the smallest edge of dry humor, "But I trust I'll know if you touch what you shouldn't." That uneasy balance, distrust laced with a thread of growing faith, lingered between them. It wasn't comfort, not yet, but it was enough to keep both alive, enough to keep the fire burning through the long winter night. Shifting currents and the wordless bond. As the winter days slipped by, the little wooden cabin no longer felt weighed down by that rigid silence of the beginning. Pauses still came, but they carried a different hue. No longer lonely, but like a smoldering blanket, keeping warmth for the two of them within the same space. Jonas was not a man of many words, but his hands never rested. He chopped wood, patched cracks in the roof, mended the frayed reins. Alina watched him, then sought her own ways to keep busy. She stitched up his worn shirt, each thread slow and careful. When it was finished, she did not fold it away in the chest but quietly slipped it on. At that moment Jonas looked up, not because he was startled, but because in that seemingly small gesture he sensed a shift. Alina was no longer standing at the threshold, no longer holding the distance of a temporary guest. The old shirt on her shoulders was her unspoken admission. She had stepped into his life. That evening, as she turned her back to loosen the worn leather skirt, the firelight flickered across fragile curves and faint bruises not yet healed. Jonas turned his face away, not out of disdain but because something strange stirred in his chest, a feeling he had long believed was lost. He spoke quietly, his voice low but sincere. "The first night, you frightened me." Alina froze, her hands pausing at the ties of her dress. She turned, her gaze searching. "Frightened you?" Jonas nodded, eyes steady. "The way you looked at me, it wasn't pleading, nor was it hatred. It made me feel I had no control. I didn't think anyone could unsettle me like that, not after all these years." Alina did not answer right away. She pulled the shirt over her shoulders, then sat on the edge of the bed. In the dim yellow light, her face softened, but it was no longer empty as before. What remained was caution, tinged with fragility. "They used to say I wasn't worth anything," she whispered, almost to herself. Jonas sat down on the wooden chair, his hands resting on his knees. He studied her for a long moment before replying, each word firm. "You're worth far more than that." The words were simple yet heavy as stone. They stood in stark contrast to everything that had been sown into her heart through all those past years. For a brief moment, her eyes glimmered with a faint spark, a fragile belief, so thin it might vanish in a blink. But it was real. That night, When Alina was about to curl up near the fire as she always did, Jonas laid a hand on her shoulder. "Tonight, take the bed. It's warm, and it's yours now." Alina widened her eyes, ready to object, but he had already stepped back, pulling out a blanket and settling himself on the floor. No further explanation. The decision was clear. He no longer saw her as a temporary guest. She climbed slowly onto the bed. The worn mattress still held his warmth, carrying the scent of pine wood and hearth smoke. For the first time in many months, Alina did not curl up like a small creature bracing against harm. She stretched out, letting her breath mingle with the wind whistling beyond the eaves. Across the room, Jonas lay on the floor, eyes open toward the shadowed ceiling. He listened to her breathing. Strangely, that sound made the room feel less vast and cold. It became a reminder that he was no longer alone. From that night on, something unnamed existed between them, something both understood without speaking. They no longer thought of each other as I and she, but as we. When Jonas split wood, he set aside smaller pieces so Alina could more easily start the fire. When Alina mended his leather gloves, she added an extra lining so his hands would sting less in the cold. No thanks were spoken, no explanations needed. Quiet gestures, but each one wove another invisible thread binding them closer. Jonas was not a man quick to reveal himself. Yet one misty morning, when he saw Alina fold the washed shirt and hang it neatly on the wooden peg, he felt something stir within him, something he thought long dead. "I didn't believe I could ever want again." He did not speak it aloud, but held it inside. From that moment, Jonas knew. She was not just a shadow seeking refuge. She had become part of his rhythm of life, a new pulse running through the frost he had once wrapped himself in. As for Alina, in the long nights on the bed that was now hers, she no longer dreamed of encroaching darkness. Instead, sometimes, in the half-sleep of drifting dreams, she found herself sitting by the fire, listening to Jonas quietly sharpening a knife. And she smiled. A small smile, brief but true. They never spoke of the future, yet both knew. Here, in the little wooden house, something new was beginning. Deep intimacy and a new future. Late in the afternoon, the winter wind slipped through the cracks of the cabin door, carrying with it a biting chill. Jonas returned from a long journey, boots soaked through, hands trembling from the frost. He said nothing, only sat quietly by the fire. Alina stepped forward. She didn't ask questions. She didn't hesitate. Silently, she knelt in front of him and pulled off the heavy boots. The soft thud of wet leather hitting the dry wooden floor echoed gently. She reached for a pair of dry socks, easing them onto his feet. Her small hands pressed against his frozen skin, rubbing slowly, firmly, as though willing her warmth into his body. It was not part of their agreement, not duty, not obligation. It was care, true care. Jonas looked down at her, eyes deep as if searching for words, but he stayed silent. He only let the warmth of her hands spread into his numbed fingers. That evening, they lingered by the fire longer than usual. Jonas set the axe aside and leaned forward. Alina handed him a cup of hot water, but as her hand brushed his, he caught it. The moment stopped, a flicker of surprise, a breath of hesitation. Yet his hand did not release hers. For the first time, they touched in a way that mattered. They were no longer just a man and a woman sharing a house. From that touch, they stepped into new ground, where real feelings began to grow. Alina didn't pull away. She let her hand rest within his. In the quiet cabin, the fire crackled softly, while their hearts beat louder than any wind outside. On another night, with snow heavy on the roof, Jonas finally spoke. His voice was low, steady, yet burdened with years of silence. "Alina, there's something I've never told anyone." She turned to him, waiting gently. "My wife, Sarah, and our son, Daniel. He lived only 6 days." The room froze in silence. Only the wood snapped and popped in the fire. Jonas stared into the flames, eyes distant, voice breaking. "Since then, I closed myself off. I thought there was nothing worth starting again." Alina slowly laid her hand on his arm. No words could erase that kind of loss, but in her gaze was a deep empathy, an understanding beyond speech. Through her eyes, even the viewers could feel their hearts ache with him. A long silence passed. Then Alina whispered, her voice fragile, as if afraid it might vanish into the wind. "Did you ever think about starting again?" That question opened a door, not just for Jonas but for both of them. The fire still burned, but inside them, another flame was lit, the flame of a possible future. Jonas didn't answer immediately. He only looked at her for a long time, as though searching in her eyes for a promise he hadn't dared to speak aloud. The following night, when the house was wrapped in silence, what was inevitable finally came. They sat side by side on the small bed. Their breaths mingled, heartbeats shortening the distance. Alina tilted her face upward. Jonas leaned down, and their lips met. At first, the kiss was soft, slow, searching, as though asking, "Is this allowed?" Then gradually it deepened, grew warmer, more certain. Not rushed, not fierce, only breath, only warmth, only the honest connection they had both waited far too long to find. In that moment, the invisible walls around Jonas crumbled. And for the first time, Alina felt she was no longer just a guest in his home. She had entered his heart. In the days that followed, everything looked the same, yet nothing was unchanged. They still lived in the small cabin. They still worked through familiar routines. But each gesture carried new meaning. Jonas split wood, setting aside the smaller pieces for Alina to light more easily. She mended his old leather gloves, sewing in an extra lining so his hands would hurt less in the cold. No thanks were spoken, no explanations given. These were simply acts of care, their own private language. And at night, Jonas no longer lay alone on the hard wooden floor. He lay beside Alina, not with haste or hunger, but with the quiet peace of two souls who had finally found shelter in one another. For the first time in years, Jonas Hale did not sleep alone. Acceptance and revelation. Morning light slipped through the cracks of the door, gently spreading across the worn wooden boards. The biting cold of the previous nights was gone, replaced by an unusual stillness. Alina opened her eyes and glanced at Jonas, who was still sitting there, his back against the wall. His gaze no longer drifted into the distance. She asked softly, her voice still heavy with sleep, "Do you regret it?" Jonas turned, his eyes firm and unwavering. "No." Alina blinked, as if to make sure she had heard him right. "Good, because I don't either." In that moment, inside the small room, a new certainty was sealed. No need for elaborate words, no need for hesitation. They had chosen, and they would not turn back. Jonas stood, opened an old wooden chest, and after rummaging for a moment, pulled out a neatly folded shirt. He set it in front of Alina. "This isn't just something to wear for the day. This is the shirt I'd give if I wanted someone to stay." Alina froze. The shirt wasn't just fabric. It was an invitation, an unspoken way of saying she belonged here with him. She touched it, her heart trembling slightly, though her eyes were calmer than ever. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice low but steady. Jonas met her gaze directly, no trace of doubt on his face. "If people look twice, it'll be because I'm Kaiwei, or because I'm in your bed. I won't lie about you." The words rang like a vow. Not loud, not theatrical, but strong as iron. Alina felt the weight of his certainty in every syllable. This was no longer the man who once avoided the world's eyes. Jonas was ready. Alina let out a soft laugh, surprised yet moved. "Aren't you afraid?" Jonas shook his head, his voice deep, steady. "Fear once held on to me, but now it's let go." A light breeze slipped through, carrying the scent of damp wood and morning warmth. Alina closed her eyes for a moment, sensing the shift in the air. The past that had once weighed like a stone felt lighter now, fading like a shadow behind them. She put on the shirt Jonas had given her. The fabric wrapped around her body, offering not just warmth but something else. The feeling of being seen, of being accepted. Jonas sat down beside her, his rough hands taking hers. No hesitation like before, no uncertainty. His grip was firm and steady, as if to say he would not let go again. They might talk. Alina whispered, "Let them." Jonas answered, short but resolute. His reply drew another laugh from her, but this time her eyes shone with trust. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was a kind of peace they had never known. The years of running, the long lonely nights, the fear of other people's judgment. All of it seemed to dissolve. Alina rested her head on his shoulder. Jonas said nothing more, only wrapped an arm around her. They had no need for excuses, no need to hide. This was them, bare, honest, and finally accepted. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting its glow across their faces. The fear that had once clung so tightly had lost its power. In its place was calm, and trust in what lay ahead. Alina whispered softly, as if confirming it one last time, "We don't have to be alone anymore." Jonas tightened his arm around her. No, never again. And in that moment, the world outside might still be full of prejudice and challenges. But here, in this small room, they had found their place. A place with no regrets, only acceptance and revelation. Jonas sat in silence for a moment, his gaze resting on the flickering flame in the lantern. Then his voice broke the quiet, steady but low. "Because I couldn't forget your face if I had turned you away, and I didn't want to live with that." Alina froze. She had not expected such words. For all the coldness he once carried, this confession was stripped of calculation. It was pure honesty. In that instant, she realized Jonas had never truly been indifferent. His actions had been guided not by obligation, but by a refusal to live with regret. "I only know," she whispered, her hands tightening on her lap, "that I don't want to leave, and I don't want to be just a body you share a bed with." Jonas turned to her, his eyes unwavering. "You're not. You never were." The words struck her deeper than any embrace. They were not sweet or poetic, but resolute, carved from truth. For the first time, Alina felt that she was seen, not as someone to be used or tolerated, but as someone worth keeping. She lowered her gaze, her voice breaking as she revealed the wound she carried. "I once lost a child. I fear I can't bear again. And when it happened, I felt like I had failed." Jonas reached for her hand, firm yet gentle. "You didn't fail. You survived." The weight of those words lifted something heavy from her chest. For years, she had hidden the pain as shame. Now Jonas reframed it as strength. She looked at him, tears filling her eyes, and for the first time in a long while, she felt safe enough to believe. "If I do carry again," she whispered, "I want it to be yours." His reply came without hesitation. "Then it will be." It was not a promise sealed by ceremony or name, but it was more powerful than either. It was a vow rooted in the quiet certainty of a man who meant what he said. The knock on the door startled them both. A voice called from outside, rough with casual suspicion. "Didn't know you had company, Hale." Jonas stood, his body blocking the view as the door cracked open. "She's Alina. That's all you need to know." His tone was sharp, final. There was no explanation, no excuse, just a declaration. In that instant, Jonas made clear to the world that she belonged here. She was not to be hidden. When the visitor left, Alina's heart still raced. But now it beat with something stronger than fear. She touched her stomach, hesitating, then looked at Jonas with trembling hope. "I think I carry yours." The silence that followed was heavy, but not with dread. Jonas's chest rose with a breath that seemed to open his entire being. He didn't feel the old shadow of loss pressing in. He felt alive. Alive in a way he had not felt since before grief consumed him. Alive because what stood before him was not the echo of the past, but the promise of a future. The next morning, Jonas walked with Alina into the town. His hand rested firmly at her back, guiding her, shielding her. Eyes turned, whispers rose, but he didn't flinch. She was his and he was hers. That truth needed no defense. Jonas Hale, who once believed silence would be his only companion, now had a woman at his side, a child on the way, and a home no longer built for one. And for the first time in years, he was ready to live. Alina gently tightened her grip on Jonas's hand, feeling the warmth in his touch like an unspoken promise. They had walked through days of fear and loss, and now, as the future slowly unfolded, they were no longer two lonely souls. Jonas looked at Alina, and in his eyes there was no longer the shadow of the past, but the light of trust. "We will go on no longer alone," he whispered, his voice calm yet steady. The road ahead might not be easy, but with Alina by his side, Jonas knew he had found the true meaning of life again. A home not just for shelter, but to be filled with love, laughter, and new hopes. And as they walked into the morning light, Jonas knew one thing with certainty. He was no longer running, because now he had chosen to live for himself, for Alina, and for the life growing within her.